Well, hello everyone. Thank you, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. Thank you very much for joining us today for this session, Advancing Water Action, Implementing the UAE-Belém Framework and Adaptation Targets in the NDCs and NAPs. It's a very timely session. This session is also a follow-up to a side event that was held at SB62 in Bonn. And it's particularly timely because, of course, with this year, the expectancy of getting revised NDCs and NAPs, that brings a shift in focus to address implementation, highlighting not only the potential of effective and resilient water management, but also its role as a motor for adaptation measures. This session is a bit of a creative approach in two parts. We will have a very technical segment at first, gaining a bit of an insight into the global goal on adaptation and the UAE to Belém framework, what's happening, what is the timeline, but also why does it matter. And then a more practical session where we not only learn about current adaptation efforts, but also can sort of collectively discover the role of the water community when it comes to the pathway forward, and particularly, of course, looking forwards to COP30. For the segment and the opening, I have now the pleasure of inviting to stage and handing over to Dr. Miriam Haritz, who is the German Water Director, heading the Directorate Water Management, Water Protection, Soil Protection at the German Federal Ministry for Environment, Climate Action, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. Since January 2023, she also acts as the President of the International Commission for the Protection of the Rhine, and I will now gladly hand over to her for a quick update on the timeline and milestones ahead of COP30. Miriam, if you would please join me on stage. Okay. Wonderful.
Yes, thank you very much for the introductory remarks and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. You've seen the long title of the ministry I'm coming from, and I would like to highlight one area specifically, and that is that of climate action. And I'm highlighting that not only because we're talking about climate issues, climate adaptation in particular here in this session today, but because indeed it's new to our ministry. The previous government separated at least part of climate policy to other ministries, and now the new government, which has been in place for a couple of months, and we're still in the process of restructuring everything, has brought back the entire climate policy field into the environmental ministry. So both mitigation and adaptation, climate action, I really like that term, I have to say, because that's what we need. Action is in the realm of our ministry. So I'm really honored to be able to speak to you from the perspective of a water director and linking water issues with climate issues. So without further ado, I will start my brief keynote. I'm really happy that water policy is gaining such a momentum and that we have achieved a lot in terms of mainstreaming water into other policy fields. For years, the water community has provided reasoning and best practices on how water can actively contribute to both mitigation and adaptation action, highlighting co-benefits also to other areas such as food, health, ecosystem, and livelihoods in general. Nevertheless, we have to be honest and say success was often rather limited. So the inclusion of a dedicated water target under the global goal on adaptation is therefore really a breakthrough that I'm really happy about. But also, to be honest again, our work is far from finished. We're just starting, basically. The technical process under the UAE-Belém work program is moving swiftly. But indicators are now being refined with the aim of adoption at COP30 already. This creates both a challenge and an opportunity for the water community. If we want the water target to be meaningful, we must actively support the definition of indicators, ensuring they connect sectors and that they are practical for countries to implement and reflecting a high level of ambition. Germany's own experience illustrates the importance of this. In 2023, actually just a week before we all headed off to New York to the UN Water Conference, we approved our first national water strategy. It was worked upon in our ministry so with an environmental perspective, but clearly with a cross-sectoral perspective. And it's not just the national water strategy of our ministry, it's the national water strategy for Germany, the strategy of all ministries. And our current government holds up the commitment of the previous government with regards to the strategy. The goal of our strategy is to prepare for an uncertain future, particularly in face of the climate crisis. Now, this strategy is then linked to a number of national laws and strategies relating to other areas, such as the Federal Climate Protection Act or the German Adaptation Strategy to climate change, but also to different implementation measures, such as the Climate Action Programme 2030. The coordination of such activities and their monitoring needs concise efforts to use synergies and avoid duplications or conflicting actions, which keeps being a major challenge. The global goal on adaptation, with its distinct target for water and related indicators, could support a streamlining of these approaches and promote cross-sectoral implementation, the nitty-gritty details which in practice are often so difficult. To reach the water target under the GGA and define relevant indicators, it will be important to build upon existing frameworks and mechanisms. For example, UN Water has established a long-standing monitoring system for SDG 6 in countries. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but rather make use of what we already have in place. Monitoring, which is difficult, the gathering of data, is the basis that can lead us to more in-depth and fact-based discussions on planning and implementation of cross-sectoral and climate-relevant approaches. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not new. Water is an essential enabler for both climate mitigation and adaptation. The climate crisis shows in water, but the solutions to many areas also lie within the water sector. And therefore, the alignment of water-related targets with NDCs and NAPs is particularly relevant. And I'm glad that Germany has been able to address this aspect in cooperation with partner countries, among others, through capacity building and strengthening data collection and data management. The coming month will be decisive. The water community has already achieved a lot by pushing for water's place within the GGA. Now, we must ensure that this target becomes operational through indicators that are robust, implementable, and politically anchored. Together, we must mobilize around COP30 to send a strong signal that water is not just one sector amongst many, but the cross-sectoral and cross-level foundation of adaptation itself. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to today's session. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for not only highlighting the role of climate action in the title of the ministry, but of course also in Germany's water strategy, the road that we have ahead of us, and of course the work is far from finished, and that we really have to look forward to the operationalization of the framework and the indicators. Of course, we cannot only look ahead, we also have to understand a bit where we're coming from. And with that, I would like to ask for Tuve Leksén, Climate Policy Advisor for WaterAid Sweden, to join me on stage to give us a bit of a explanation of the GGA, water's role in it, and of course the importance of water not only as a target, but also as an enabler. Thank you very much, Tuve.
Thank you so much, Manuel, and thank you also for that introduction. Then I don't have to kind of describe the wider picture, but I can go straight into the more nerdy details. And I just want to say also that what I will present today is a work that has been undertaken by the GGA working group in the Water Pavilion community that I'm sharing together with Jose Gesti, that I think many of you also know. So we have looked at the indicators that were proposed by the experts that have been appointed by the UNFCCC to then develop these indicators for the different targets, the 7 thematic targets and the 4 policy-oriented targets, where water and sanitation is the first target. And this consolidated list of indicators was released by by the experts and then the Secretariat ahead of the climate meeting in Bonn taking place in June. And the expert had done a really impressive work already then with shorting down the list of indicators from more than 9,000 to 490 indicators. In Brazil in November, they should agree on 100 indicators, so it's still some way to go, and I will explain a little bit more where the process is at now as well. But something that we were very happy to see already then was that a lot of the targets had indicators that also referred to other targets, so really working with the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience in a comprehensive way, understanding that resilience cannot be built in silos, of course. And we looked a little bit deeper into the different indicators that were proposed, starting with the water indicators that had been developed by the water expert group. And we were really happy to see a very large overlap with what we had proposed in the submission to the UNFCCC under the umbrella of UN Water, but coordinated by UNICEF and SWA in the summer before. We saw that of the 54 indicators that we had proposed, 31 of them were included or partly included in the report that the experts presented to the parties. And some of the examples that we saw then that was picked up in this was the SDG indicator on integrated water resources management, also a GLAS indicator on risk assessments, undertaking for WASH planning, and one of the biodiversity framework indicators on conservation of land, waters, and seas, responding to the second target that also relates to water, namely water ecosystems. We also looked at the indicators that the other groups had prepared and how much they referred to water, again, speaking about this need for working across sectors, and we were really happy to see and actually surprised to see how much they had integrated water and sanitation perspectives into their targets, with a high representation, for instance, from food and agriculture, the infrastructure, cultural heritage, and impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment. We also did the kind of opposite exercise of looking at how much the water group had incorporated other sectors in their proposed indicators, and saw that they had included quite a lot as well. Around 15% of the indicators were cross-sectoral referencing, including referencing to health, biodiversity, and then 2 of the policy-oriented targets as well. So where are we now? I think all of us in here can be very grateful to the experts, the UNFCCC experts, for the different targets that have been working since the meeting in Bonn, where they received new guidance from the parties on how they should now narrow down the indicators further. They have worked throughout the summer with these instructions to deal with some of the outstanding issues, including shortening the list down to 100 indicators from the 490 that they presented there. I think now we are at around 115, but also ensuring that the indicators proposed are adaptation relevant. As was said before, a lot of the indicators come from other sustainability frameworks, which is good as well, but they need to respond to the GGA framework and what that is set out to do. The cross-target integration also needs to be further strengthened, verifying metadata, standardization and harmonization across the different targets is also needed, and there is quite a big discussion on MOI, means of implementation, including climate finance, enablers, and indicator structure. And all of this was something that the experts met to discuss last week in Nairobi, and they are currently working with preparing a new report that should then be given to the parties, or the Secretariat and the parties, ahead of a workshop that should take place in Bonn towards the end of October, before the climate meeting in Belém in Brazil in November. So this is kind of the first part of the negotiation. The other part of the negotiations relate to the implementation of the GDA. How should we actually put this into practice? And there are kind of 2 strands within this implementation discussions, negotiations of the GDA. The first one relates to how should this actually be operationalized. And from the decision at COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan, there is a decision to work with something called the Baku Adaptation Roadmap and a high-level dialogue on adaptation. And what the parties now try to come forward with is what this should actually include. And there is a quite big debate around this because there are already a lot of existing UNFCCC bodies and work streams, including the Adaptation Committee, the Least Developed Countries Expert Group, and the Nairobi Work Programme. So what a lot of the parties say is that for this to actually be something meaningful, it needs to bring coherence between the already existing work programs and bodies that we have. It shouldn't duplicate anything that is already out there, and it needs to align with the ongoing processes. There's quite a lot of convergence around these points, but there are also parties that actually don't want to continue with this whatsoever because they think that we already have what we need. But controversial points then, of course, relate to the structure and mandate of this. Should it include MY, means of implementation, and climate financing from developed countries to developing countries? What should be the reporting and monitoring mechanisms, and so on? So that's one of the very big and heated discussions that actually weren't even able to conclude in Bonn, but was postponed until the COP meeting. Another relates to transformative adaptation, and that comes from an understanding that doing incremental adaptation or other kinds of adaptation approaches alone may not be enough to actually address the very deep-rooted systematic vulnerabilities that a lot of contexts experience. But this topic is also highly contested, partly due to that there is not one definition of what it means. It's still under conceptual development, so not everyone knows what it means and therefore, or have the same agreement of what it means. And that also, of course, then makes it difficult to find a common ground. But also some of the controversial points relates to how much this kind of adaptation that is really the most kind of comprehensive and costly should be promoted versus other kinds of adaptation. And that also relates to that different contexts may be more or less ready for different kinds of adaptations as well. And again, there are many parties that say that if we are to do this very big effort, we need climate finance and means of implementation, so capacity building, technology transfer, and so on, to be able to do that. And some of the messages that we would like to bring forward, and this is a work in progress in the GDA working group in the Water Pavilion, but just to say, we very much agree with that whatever mechanism comes out to implement the GDA, it needs to maximize the complementarity with existing adaptation bodies and programs. And it also needs to support countries to actually undertake this work through financing mechanism, capacity support, technology transfer, because we see a big gap in that in many countries. There's also a big need to elevate water and sanitation resilience into national planning documents and implementation. And this is something that Jose, that will speak after me, will speak more about, and what trends and needs we see there. It also needs to be a framework that supports long-term learning so that it can actually be an iterative process, so we can see what we do, see how it goes, and then develop it after that. We need to link the implementation of the GDA to global progress tracking. While adaptation is highly contextual, we need to be able to track the progress at the global level as well, to really motivate that to continue happening, for instance, for the global stocktake. And of course, last but not least, inclusion is key. We know that it's a right for people to be included, but it also leads to more informed decision-making and more sustainable implementation, of course. And with that, I would like to say thank you. We look forward to engaging with the water sector in the preparation for COP, and also hopefully see some of you at least at the Water Pavilion in Belém. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tove, of course, for only highlighting the Water Pavilion, the work of the working group, but also, of course, giving us a quick run-through of where we stand with the current list of indicators, what's coming ahead, and most importantly, what is needed for implementation, but also how do we ensure that implementation leads to meaningful adaptation. And I think implementation, and as you mentioned, Tove, is already a keyword, particularly when it comes to the next segment. As mentioned before, we're still expecting a lot of NAPs to come through, or national adaptation plans to come through. And the policy framework is already a bit more established. And of course, that means also that we can learn a bit in the review of their implementation efforts, particularly related to the UAE to Belém framework. So now I have the honor and the chance to give the floor to, or rather the screen, as Jose Gesti is joining us virtually. And Jose Gesti is Senior Advisor for Climate Action at Sanitation and Water for All, and will give us a quick sort of run through through the tracking of water and sanitation in the National Adaptation Plan implementation. Jose?
Thank you, Manuel. I hope that you can hear me well. I would like to also start my presentation by acknowledging the hard work of the full GGA working group as part of the Water Pavilion. Sanitation and Water for All is privileged to be part of the steering committee of the Water Pavilion, and also working with several partners in keeping an eye right on how the adaptation negotiations are moving. But importantly, as we will speak in this presentation, this part of the session, in trying to make global agreements, global paragraphs, and paper into reality of the ground, and as soon as possible, because the climate emergency is with us, and it's not just enough to congratulate ourselves by having gotten a specific target of the global goal on adaptation. Now we really need to steer into implementation. So yeah, that's the focus on this presentation, and I will especially also thank Tove, as both of us, together with Manuel as well, we've been closely coordinated to try to build complementarity among our presentations. So thanks, Tove and Manuel, for all that. The first slide, please. I would like to begin by placing this conversation in its policy and institutional context. It's been just 10 days ago at the Global NAP Expo in Zambia that the Less Developed Countries Expert Group from the UNFCCC has released the updated technical guidelines for national adaptation planning process. These new guidelines were much expected and are fully now structured around the global goal on adaptation and the several thematic targets, the 7 thematic targets, including certainly the first target on water and sanitation climate resilience. This update of the National Adaptation Planning Technical Guidelines is reflecting a shift in what is the current focus from NAP formulation into NAP implementation. And the guidelines are recognizing that the diagnostic phase is kind of behind us, and countries are now requested to move into practical implementation and operationalization of the global adaptation targets. And this is, we know, especially complex because of the cross-cutting nature of some of the targets, mainly for us, water and sanitation. This brings me to a second key development, which is the upcoming 2025 National Adaptation Planning Progress Report. This report is currently being prepared by the UNFCCC Secretariat. And what is important to highlight about this year NAP progress report is that for the first time is going to come with a specific and a standalone section, which is dedicated on how NAPs are being implemented. I have had the honor of being nominated by the Secretariat, by the UNFCCC Secretariat, to coordinate the preparations of this new section of the report. And this has included conducting an in-depth analysis on how the target, the GGA target on water sanitation, is being implemented across the NAPs, that the National Adaptation Plans that have been submitted so far. And I've been coordinated with other major stakeholders as well to get their inputs in relation to the other thematic areas of the global goal on adaptation, important in food, health, infrastructure, etc. The findings of this analysis were submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat a couple of weeks ago, and they are working right now into incorporating, summarizing and incorporating into the final version of the report, which I say is still on the making. This section of the report is especially important because the National Adaptation Plan Progress Report is a negotiated document at COP. This year, 2025 Progress Report will be negotiated at COP 30. And as we know, implementation, both adaptation and implementation are major topics that, as Tob has explained, are one of the key main tracks of the adaptation negotiations this year. So, and that's what I would like to focus today on, how we are already learning from countries that are moving from adaptation planning to action on the ground, particularly on water and sanitation priorities. The next slide, please. Before I present the findings of the analysis, let me briefly walk you through the methodology that we have that is behind this analysis. As you know, the global goal on adaptation framework was only agreed December 2023 at COP28, and discussions on the indicators against the targets, as Tove and it's been explained before, is still ongoing. This means that for now, we cannot yet assess country progress against any formal set of benchmarks. Instead, the approach taken here is being a qualitative one. The analysis provides a snapshot on how countries are implementing their water and sanitation priorities as they have been articulated in national adaptation plans. And then in correspondence as well with the different components of the target 9A on water and sanitation. Specifically, the focus on implementation is only when water and sanitation have been prioritized first in the country NAP, and then they have been taken to implementation. And for that, the analysis, what we've done is triangulate data from three main sources at the moment, which is number one, the 62 national adaptation plans already submitted to the UNFCCC. Then publicly available information from databases from the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environmental Facility. And also we have captured information coming from bilateral and multilateral efforts. The aim of this analysis is not to be exhaustive, but to offer early insights into how countries are translating NAP priorities into action on the ground. The next slide, please. So let's begin with the first component of the target 9A of the global goal on adaptation, which focuses on water scarcity. We see increasing recognition in national adaptation plans of the need to reduce climate-induced water scarcity, particularly through integrated water resource management. Importantly, many countries are moving beyond diagnosis and vulnerability assessments towards implementation, and they are investing in water storage, in source protection, and diversification of the supply. However, challenges remain. We see that in many cases, climate risks are still not fully embedded in long-term water security planning, and data monitoring systems are often undeveloped, and across sector coordination, especially with agriculture, is still too fragmented. Strengthening this nexus is certainly going to be key for implementation of the framework. The next slide, please. Next is on water-related hazards such as floods and droughts, and there is growing evidence of countries upgrading infrastructure and integrating risk-informed planning, nature-based solutions, while at the same time increasingly recognize that this is rarely implemented at the scale. A major lesson here is that the integration between disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation remains at the moment very weak. There is also the insights that local capacities, including institutional, technical, and financial, often limit the progress in this area. We also see opportunities, for example, early warning systems, when coupled with community resilient approaches, can offer significant gains, but they are at the moment underutilized in current implementation efforts. Continue with the next one, please. On water supply. Water supply is actually the area where we see the strongest link between NAP priorities that have been already included in national adaptation plans and implementation. Where water supply is explicitly prioritized in a national adaptation plan, and where adaptation finance is accessible, countries are taking action. They are investing in infrastructure, they are protecting water sources, and they are diversifying the supply. But challenges still persist. The integration of nature-based solutions, the integration of inclusive governance into water supply is still limited according to what we see in implementation. We also know disparities between rural and urban areas and across transboundary contexts. And this is just pointing to the need for better coordination, stronger data systems, and supportive policy frameworks. The next slide now to sanitation. This component continues to lack most in NAP implementation. Although climate resilient sanitation is mentioned more often now, as we see in the newer national adaptation plans, it completely remains underrepresented both in planning policies and in climate financing flows. Progress here where exists tends to focus only on physical infrastructure resilience, which is mainly protecting sanitation systems from floods. But sanitation is as I say, is not well mainstream into national climate priorities. There is limited attention to behavioral change in implementation, limited attention to governance, limited attention to ecological approaches to sanitation, and we know all of these ingredients are essential for climate resilient sanitation. Rural areas are especially vulnerable, and they are often left behind. So ensuring equity in sanitation adaptation must become much stronger going forward. On my last slide, I would like, as we close, let me return briefly to the structure of the target 9A of the Global Goal Adaptation that focuses on water and sanitation. So, as we've seen, the target breaks down climate resilience, from water security, etc. There are 5 components, right? From water scarcity, hazards, water supply, sanitation, etc. Our analysis, as it was requested by the UNFCCC Secretariat, has examined these 5 components separately to gain insights, as we have discussed, on how each of these are being addressed through NAP implementation. This has real advantages. It's helping us ensure that no aspect, especially the often overlooked ones such as climate resilient sanitation, is helping us so that they are not left behind. In fact, one of the clearest findings from the analysis is how sanitation is lagging behind. Despite this being included, sanitation is clearly a part of the target of the GGA. So without the targeted focus, progress risk being uneven. Now, but while this component-based lens is useful in an analytical way, we have to be very clear. Climate resilient water security is systemic inherently, and it cannot be built through a siloed approach. So in practice, progress on one component often depends on the integrated planning and action across all the others, and also across other GGA thematic targets, as Dr. Harris has already started the discussion with, including with food, with health, ecosystems, and infrastructure. I will finish now. The cross-cutting nature of water, hydrologically, institutionally, and economically, means that transformational progress requires multi-sectoral coordination, inclusive governance, and in many cases, regional and transboundary collaboration. In sum, these 5 components of the GGA target offer a framework for targeted action, but implementation must bring all of them together into coherent and synergetic responses that are grounded in context, equity, and ambition. Thank you very much. Back to you, Manuel.
Thank you so much, Jose, and also for highlighting how we currently have to view the NAP implementation. And I think this is also already a good key to turn a bit more to the practical side and look really at what is currently happening on the ground when it comes to water action in climate adaptation. And therefore, I now have the honor for a quick panel, or rather showcase, of three different panelists and three different solutions that also show how current adaptation efforts are undertaken, and of course also to highlight how those could relate to the alignment with different policy frameworks. And first up, I therefore have now the honor to invite Bernd Schönewald, who is a senior sector economist in the Department of Water and Sanitation at the KfW Development Bank. He joined KfW in 1996 and has worked most of his career in the water sector as project and portfolio manager based in Frankfurt, Germany. Please join me on stage.
See, okay, yes, that works. Just a moment, I hope you can hear me properly. Okay, yes, so I would like to present the role of KfW in advancing water action, especially related to adaptation, of course, here. So I just, well, before I come, let's say, specifically to adaptation and give you some examples of what we are doing, how we work. Yeah, I need, I think, to talk a little bit about what is KfW and how are we working. So to give you a little bit of the frame of our our work. So because I'm not sure whether you all know how a public development bank is actually functioning. So what are we doing? We are implementing German financial cooperation on behalf of the German government. So we work government to government, and by this we support partner countries mainly in financing infrastructure. As a financing institution, we are able to blend budget funds with capital market funds, and by this on one side, we can increase the funding volume of projects, and also we can offer tailor-made financing conditions to our partners. We are, as I said, we are financing infrastructure, and we are not implementing the projects ourselves. This is the responsibility of our national partners. Well, this is called Project Executing Agency, and in the water sector, quite often these are public utilities. So, what is our contribution to SDG 6 and to climate adaptation? So, German Development Corporation in general and the Financial Corporation in particular via KfW Development Bank are major contributors in supporting the achievement of SDG 6 internationally. And as KfW, we commit for the water sector during the last years an average 900 million euros per year. And by this, we are expecting to provide access to water and sanitation and to protect against flooding for at least 10 million people annually. The water sector plays a major role also in KfW's climate adaptation financing. So what does it mean? On one side, about half of all adaptation commitments of KfW are made in the water sector. So this is the most relevant sector for adaptation also in KfW. And on the other side, when we look at the water sector, last year, 96% of our commitments for the water sector were actually related to adaptation. So it's quite, almost 100%, you can say. Just a quick word how we are working with our partners. So usually we have a long-term and trusting cooperation with our partners, which is one of the success factors of our cooperation. So in order to help our partners with the implementation of the project, we can provide some kind of institutional support. For that, we conduct an institutional analysis during project preparation. On that level, we can determine the level of institutional support. What we usually do in most of the cases, we finance an implementation consultant who is supporting the project executing agency in implementing the projects. Because they usually don't have the capacity for this specific work and the additional coordination which is necessary. Then additionally, we can also address specific shortcomings via so-called accompanying measure, which is like a tailor-made solution for the individual partner, where we can address specific issues. So now, coming closer to the topic, climate mainstreaming. So I just wanted to highlight, we have an established process at KfW since a number of years, which is called climate mainstreaming. And with that, we identify the climate relevance of a future project. So this has to be done for all projects, not only water sector projects, which means we can say the Paris conformity of a project is checked by this, and we can determine whether a project is contributing to climate adaptation and/or climate mitigation. If it contributes to adaptation, we are doing an adaptation screening, and by this we can determine the climate risks and the climate resilience through and of the project. And with that, we can also kind of adjust the measures if we see that there is room for improvement. Now, having said that, I can present you two examples of what we're doing. Well, as was presented, we are working still in the old world, so to say. So we don't have very specific adaptation targets yet in our partner countries. So basically, it's quite easy to establish whether a project is related to adaptation, climate adaptation in general. I selected two projects. One is related to flood protection, and the other one is related to drought, basically. So starting with a project in Porto Alegre, which is called Urban Drainage and Flood Resistance Project. Porto Alegre is the capital of the state of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, with 1.5 million inhabitants. And it has seen a rapid increase in the population in high-risk areas related to flooding in the recent years. And at the same time, it suffers from inadequate drainage infrastructure. And one thing what happened that, let's say, poorer parts of the population settled close to drainage canals, which of course is a problem when you have a flooding. Following devastating floods in 2024, more than 2.1 million people were affected, and the estimated reconstruction costs amount to more than $2 billion US. So in order to prevent that in future, this project was established, and this is to ensure that the city Porto Alegre drains in future in a nature-based and climate-friendly manner. And by this, it can protect its population better from the effects of of extreme weather events. And eventually to improve the living conditions. So we have four principal measures. One is the improvement of the rainwater drainage system, the expansion of the wastewater drainage. So rainwater drainage and wastewater drainage. And the improvement of flood protection, and also the establishment of safe shelters for people in high-risk areas. So the second project is related to Windhoek, Namibia. So that's quite a different project. Here we are, Porto Alegre is a coastal city, of course. You can, well, from the name it's clear. But Windhoek is a city which is landlocked. It's far away from the coast. And it's a very arid climate in the region. The city has about 500,000 inhabitants. And since decades already providing the population with a reliable supply of drinking water is a concern. So I think about 30 years ago already a first so-called direct potable reclamation plant was built. What does it exactly mean? Since there's not available fresh water, wastewater, so treated wastewater is reused. It's treated in a second step, so to say, which is similar to desalination. So it's kind of a desalination plant to process drinking water quality, and that is reintroduced into the water supply network. So due to the climate change and population increase, this was not enough anymore. And a second direct potable reclamation plant needs to be erected. And that is part of the Windhoek 2 drinking water security project. We need this plant, but we also need additional wastewater volume. So therefore, the 2 existing sewage treatment plants are being modernized and expanded. This is being done with a financing of 50 million development loan, 50 million euro, and accompanying measures, which help the city to identify and reduce water losses, which of course is very relevant because this treatment of water to get back into drinking water quality is very expensive. And in comparison, the water loss reduction is very cheap. So the more water loss reduction you achieve, the cheaper the whole process or the whole water supply is at the end of the day. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, let's.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for not only, of course, highlighting how KfW is working in, as you said, the old world, but rather so showcasing how current adaptation efforts, particularly in the water sector, are undertaken. Now, I turn to More Blessings Shidaushe, senior South African Regional Advocacy Manager for Water Aid, to show us how water aid is making climate resilience gender responsive in Mozambique. Thank you very much. Sorry? Of course.
Good afternoon. Are we there? Okay, my name is More Blessings Shidaushe. What I'm going to do is, over and above the big processes that we have heard about, and over and above the big technical issues that have come to the table, I just am coming to give the link of that to the ground, using what Water Aid is doing in Mozambique, because at the end of the day, it is about the woman and the girl in a rural area, which is very far from everywhere, who doesn't have anything. We should benefit from all these big processes that we are talking about. So I'm just here to share with you, you can move to the next slide, to share with you what Water Aid Mozambique has been doing. And when I talk rural and nothing, this is not a made-up picture, this is real. Unfortunately, we have more than, not one, not two, but many, many millions of people across many countries in Mozambique and Southern Africa, where I come from, who live like this, to whom water, sanitation and hygiene are only dreams. So this is why, for me, it's very important to say, let's bring the two stories together. Let's have the big processes, but at the end of the day, let's come back to the picture and say, how do we make this real and better for the people that have to live like this? Next slide. So Mozambique Water Aid is working in Mozambique, and Mozambique itself is a very complicated country, very, very poor. Number 183 or 184 out of 185 on the Human Development Index. A lot of things, especially in rural communities, don't work. We have very high illiteracy levels. We have very poor socioeconomic conditions in general. And in all that, the woman and the girl are the most affected. And this is why, for water aid, it is very, very important to say the interventions that we are working on must be able to link and to bring gender responsiveness into all the climate resilience and adaptation work that we are doing. So over and above Mozambique being a complicated country, I'm going to talk about a district called Kwamba District, which is in the northern parts of the country. And that picture that I showed you is from Kwamba, and it's a very common picture when you move around the communities to see how people are living. Both the country and this particular district, they face this dilemma of floods and droughts. In the last few years, Mozambique has been one of the countries that has been experiencing cyclones much more regularly and more often than other countries in Southern Africa. But at the same time, we've also had some very severe droughts in the same country. And so access to water is really, really very tricky and very impacted whether there is a drought or whether there is a flood. So these prolonged droughts are really bringing very, very complicated situations, especially to women and girls. They have to travel longer distances. They have to take care of sick relatives. Last year, I think Mozambique experienced 40,000 cases of cholera when the rains came. And we see cholera as a challenge to the Southern Africa region every time there is the rain season comes, and we have many people that lose their lives. We have many people that we have to spend a lot in terms of making sure that these challenges are addressed. And in the process of trying to get water and fresh water for the families, women have to walk longer distances. And of course, one of the big issues that we are seeing more and more is that gender-based violence, such as rape, is becoming much more prevalent, especially in rural, remote communities. Next slide. So, I can skip this one, you can go to the next. So Water Aid has been trying to say, okay, so what can we do in this? We need to make sure that we are also doing policy advocacy that will highlight the challenges of these rural communities in Kwamba, and the fact that there's a process of revising the national adaptation plans has been an opportunity that we have used. And what we have done is we have worked with the district of Kwamba to update a local adaptation plan. And this is for the district of Kwamba, and it is very aligned to the national process, and of course the processes that we're talking about here, because we realize that the last one was done 5 years ago, and quite a lot of things have changed, and therefore communities needed to be brought to the table to share their challenges and to say, if you are going to make a new local adaptation plan, as communities, this is how we're experiencing climate change, this is how we're experiencing the challenges of floods and droughts, and this is how we would like to have our issues reflected in the local adaptation plan as it is being updated. Next slide. And of course, all this we are doing because we would like the communities to enhance their capacities to adapt and to strengthening their resilience and to empower women and girls and the local policies. You can go to the next one. So what we did was we sat down and said what kind of a process can help us to have an effective local adaptation plan at the end. And the first thing that we did was to work with the local authorities. We developed a memorandum of understanding with the local authorities, the National Directorate. Of course, this is at local level, but it started, the process and the negotiation started at a higher level, at the national level, with the Ministry of Agriculture, Environment and Fisheries, and then also at the provincial level with the relevant directorates, and the district level, and of course, civil society organizations, including women's organizations. So we came together and made an MOU, which of course helps in terms of clarity of what needs to be done, accountability, and sharing responsibilities. Next. You can go to the next one. So after that, we developed clear terms of reference of what needed to be done. And then after the terms of reference were developed and aligned, we then went through a process of capacity building where several officials from the different stakeholders that I talked about in the previous slide were identified, key people were brought together, and we did some capacity building around climate change, the impacts, and how to integrate gender and communities into a new local adaptation plan. And after the capacity building, these teams were then sent to various communities to go to the ground and sit with the people and talk to them and understand the issues from their own perspective, so that at the end of the day, the LAP was not going to be reflecting what are perceived as problems, but the actual problems that are on the ground. And after that, it was then a draft LAP was drafted, and then it was brought to authorities, to the same authorities and the same members in the memorandum of agreement to come together and to approve it. And that process has been done. You can move. And this is a picture from one of the consultation processes. And what I wanted to note here was that in the process, the methodology included separating groups of people according to age and gender. And because this is partly because in our African culture, sometimes it is very difficult for women to speak in the presence of men. And therefore, to maximize on this, we said we need to make sure that people are in spaces and groups and where they can feel that they really can express themselves. And this was done also in very local languages where people could really express themselves. And at the end of the day, we can confidently say that the LAP really reflects what the women told us on the ground, and therefore, using their input, we can safely say that we contributed to a LAP which is gender responsive. You can move. This I talked about already, yeah? I think I can go to the last slide. The last slide talks about what reflections and what lessons we took out of the process. We realized that for us to have a successful LAP, we need to develop strategic and key partnerships. And this we did with the stakeholders that I shared in the beginning, all the way from national government, provincial government, local NGOs, local women's groups, and civil society. And there was a good synergy amongst these different groups, and there was clear role definition, and that helped us, the whole process, to flow smoothly. And we also realized that it was very, very important to time or to plan appropriately without rushing. We were very conscious that most of the women in the rural areas, it seems now they have quite a lot that they have to do depending on the season. So we had to be sensitive of the time of going there. Are we going to be able to not take these women and girls away from what they have to do in their day-to-day life, and use those time slots where they are not very busy and they can come, they can focus on the discussion without having to think about other responsibilities that they have. We also realized that we need to allocate adequate resources, because this process is very extensive. It's very time and human and financial resource demanding. But if you want to have a proper process, you really have to plan and allocate resources. Otherwise, you do a half-baked process. But that was not what we wanted. And you also have to be very inclusive, from young girls, from men, from boys, from women in the villages. But the most important value of these conversations that we had on the ground was the use of local languages where people could really just express themselves. And this is why I say to you, at the end of the day, we can confidently say we did incorporate what the women on the ground really wanted to have reflect in the lab. And the lab has since been signed off by the local authorities for implementation, and WaterAid is now identifying other districts where we can repeat a similar process to make sure that the country, the different provinces and districts in the country can be covered, and then this is a process that then builds on into the national adaptation plan for the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for not only breaking down the global policy for the overall policy frameworks that we see to a more community and local level, but also really showing us how these approaches can be scaled. Now, for the last showcase, I want to turn to Kate Nimanya, the Regional Director of Africa for Water for People, to tell us a bit about the progress in climate adaptation for the WASH they have made in Uganda and the two-sided approach, both working from a national level as well as a local level. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Water for People. I'm going to be sharing about the progress in climate adaptation in WASH. I experienced from Uganda. Water for People works in a number of 9 other countries, but I will share our experience looking at the national and the local. So my presentation will look at how we connect national climate planning to local action. And in my presentation, I will look at how the review process is in terms of climate planning and how the whole process goes. I will share how actors like us get engaged, and I will show an example of a local adaptation in line with the national priorities of this particular country. But first, a bit of some context. Water for People has been working in Uganda more than 10 years, but in this particular district, found in Western Uganda for over 10 years. So we do partner with the local government as well as other institutions that do catchment management, in this case, Lake Albert Water Management Zone, as well as the national government looking at the line ministries and other stakeholders within the same pace. So there's a growing appreciation that strong local and national systems are critical. I think like we've seen the case of Mozambique, they're very critical for lasting wash services and climate change is impacting services. So freshwater ecosystems also contribute directly to the quality of wash services. So this is a growing appreciation. That's the map of Uganda. It shows, the red shows where our Everyone Forever districts are. We do spend more time in those districts, but much of our work also goes to scale in those other districts that you see. So how does the National Climate Assessment and Planning in Uganda look like? Working with a number of partners, UNICEF with support from SIWI and others. We have sector working groups where Water for People is a great partner. And we've done the climate and vulnerability risk assessment for the sector for water and sanitation in Uganda about in 2022. And from this risk assessment, you can see that the top risks are related to water. So flooding and drought is one of the top risks. And that going into now the planning stage, the Ministry of Water and Environment felt we need to develop a specific WASH National Adaptation Plan. So, but before that, from the risks, it was important that this is well highlighted in our NDC. So having identified WASH as the highest risk, there was an update in 2022 on the NDCs. So Uganda is one of those countries where you find already WASH in the NDC, but already at the moment, as I speak now, there's already another review going on for Uganda. So all these assessments really help us, and also our experience as an NGO, to go into improving some of these documents. So water is a priority sector for adaptation. There's no debate about that. And adaptation is the main response to climate change for the country. So as a signatory to the Paris Agreement, Uganda is committed to reducing emissions, just like others, and building resilience. And we as WASH actors in the space play a critical role in supporting our government in fulfilling those pledges. So very soon we'll see a new NDC. So how does the process look like? We've had a roadmap developed together with government, and we pretty much followed this to develop the NAP. Lots of literature review going in there, stakeholder consultations, and we're lucky to be one of those organizations that were consulted, looking at the risk assessment, going into costing. We have quite a number of tools that the sector uses to cost out all the other actions. Very soon we'll be launching the NAP come September. But what were the specific roles for Water for People? So we participated in the consultation meetings as well as interviews, and we're lucky that the fact that we are also part of many working groups, the GGA working groups, my colleagues at the global level, were able to review some of these documents. So we're coming into a place where we've had reviews from people who are already thinking about the indicators, thinking about what should go in there. So, and then also sharing our experience. Kamwenge District Local Government, we've worked there for a number of years and quite a lot of experience on how adaptation works in local context. We're members of the technical committee, but yeah, like I said, we have a lot to share from our work at the local government. So what is in progress at the moment, the WASH NAP looks at a number of aspects, 7 of them: climate, mobility, transboundary issues. Already we're very much close to Congo and other countries, integrated water resources management, indigenous knowledge, stakeholder engagement, nature-based solutions, and yeah, very good action. So just you can read the objectives, quite a lot is in there, but I believe it's one of those rich documents that all actors would be able to go to and implement quite a lot in there. Of course, financing is an issue, and we're already, thinking about it. We have some ongoing initiatives supporting government to even use some of these documents to mobilize resources for different management zones, but also developing much larger programs like the Catchment Investment Program, which is the Water Fund. Water for People has been involved in together with other actors. So from the national planning to local climate action, how does that look like? I thought I would give an example of some of our work in Kamwenge District. So if you look at the NAP and what we are doing in there, the objective is to strengthen climate-resilient water resources and related ecosystems to ensure improved and sustained access to water. We've been able to document this this work, and you can use that QR code or look for me or my colleagues or our booth to see some of the case studies. So this one is for Kamwenge, but we have other case studies from other countries. And considering the NAP, you can clearly see integrated water resources management, stakeholder engagement, and nature-based solutions in this particular case. So when we look at adaptation within Kamwenge, we focus on three aims, looking at healthy, fresh water ecosystems. We have lots of examples around protecting and restoring catchments, nature-based solutions, green livelihoods in there, dynamic and inclusive service management. We are looking at strengthening governance, planning. Initially, we had a master plan that focused so much on infrastructure, operation and maintenance, but now we are looking at, going further and look at ways in which we can respond to identify climate risks, and of course the strong infrastructure, really shifting to climate resilient designs and diversifying energy sources. We do solar powered systems in most of our work. So there's quite a lot if you delve into these cases, which I encourage all of us to read. That's the Mpanga Catchment Investment Program that we're developing together with government, and we hope it can be funded by quite a number of people. So as I close, my last slide, just a few reflections on, there's always a two-pronged approach. We can look from risks. It's always good to do the risk and vulnerability assessments. The national planning is important to position most of our work, and then generating evidence from the local impact work. So we can see that the work that we do at the local level can actually support governments to improve their plans and come up with actionable items. And with us, it has always been having a seat at the national level engagements, walking the journey with government, getting our hands dirty, reviewing documents, tweaking around all the actions until we get a good plan. I believe Uganda has a good plan. And a systemic approach always makes WASH services climate resilient by strengthening what are the challenges within the systems. Is it about governance? Is it about financing, technology? So for most of our work, we identify where the bottlenecks are and then eventually, focus on those areas. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kate, for really showing us how these actions relate across different scales. And of course, thank you to all our panelists. We've heard a lot around different adaptation cases, different approaches to adaptation, how adaptation works now, and of course, before the important words with targets and policy frameworks. And I think one thing that, of course, relates to that is the science-based target network. And of course, that also brings us to a last little reflection, particularly around the science-based targets network, and of course, how targets can create further engagement of, for example, the private sector and other actors to really further water action and water adaptation. And therefore, I would like to welcome Alan Townsend to give us a quick reflection on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Manuel, for the invitation and the kind introduction. Yeah, so as Manuel alluded to, I'm just going to give a brief overview of science-based targets for nature and the targets that are a part of that. So my name is Alan Townsend. I'm a senior program officer with WWF in the US. And then I also have the great privilege of serving as a co-lead for Science-Based Target Network's Freshwater Hub. And so I'm just going to briefly, like I mentioned earlier, just talk about how these targets are driving corporate engagement and trying to further help align with policy and other frameworks, and to just show how these private sector actors can be included in water action. And so I don't have slides today. I'm just going to kind of verbally cover this. So thank you for bearing with me. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with SBTN, it's a coalition of over 80 environmental NGOs and mission-driven organizations to develop leading target-setting approach for corporate action on nature. And through SBTN, we collaborate to develop and standardize science-based guidance and resources for companies to set place-based targets that complement corporate reporting frameworks and also enabling companies to act on what they disclose. The targets also help bridge the gap in private sector action on societal goals by answering the question, how much, where, and when gap for credible targets. And so within the framework, it's a 5-step framework. The first step requires companies to complete an integrated assessment of 2 types of state of nature indicators in their direct operations and in their upstream value chain. The first set are pressure sensitive state of nature, which basically summarizes the state of nature most directly connected to companies' pressures on freshwater, land, soon to be oceans. And then the other set of indicators are biodiversity state of nature indicators. And these are indicators that estimate the state of nature along the 3 dimensions of biodiversity, which are ecosystems, genetic biodiversity, and species. So some examples of some pressure-sensitive state of nature indicators. The first ones I mentioned are land use change. The type of land use is originally water use and water pollution. Under the biodiversity state of nature indicators, just some examples include species richness, ecosystem integrity, and areas critical to nature's contribution to people or ecosystem services. And so as companies move through the process, I'm just kind of skipping over step 2 at this point for purpose of this presentation, they get to the actual target setting phase for freshwater, which I'm just going to discuss that today, but there's also land targets as well. Eventually ocean targets that I'll just mention are designed to act synergistically with the target. So although there's freshwater targets and companies might set those, the land target, they're designed to kind of interact. So for freshwater quantity, the basis of the targets are environmental flow and groundwater level thresholds. And then for water quantity, the targets currently focus on nutrients, so nitrogen and phosphorus, and those thresholds are based on trying to avoid eutrophication in freshwater systems. And so those are the current targets. We're continuing to develop these over time. And I'm actually at our session on Thursday. We're going to be launching our public consultation for a methodology specific to pesticides. So if you're interested in that, welcome to have you. And then the last bit I'll just kind of segue to is the connection or links to the freshwater challenge. So the freshwater challenge is it's a huge voluntary, ambitious corporate-led partnership, or country-led partnership, I should say, to restore restore 300 kilometers of degraded rivers and 350 million hectares of degraded wetlands by 2030, while securing the protection of freshwater ecosystems important to biodiversity and ecosystem services. Launched at the UN Water Conference in New York in 2023 by the governments of Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mexico, Zambia, and I'm missing one, I apologize. It's part of the Water Action Agenda and now has over 50 countries that have joined, including the EU. The challenge's main purpose is to accelerate delivery of national plans and strategies to restore and conserve freshwater ecosystems. And the reason I bring that up is bring up the freshwater challenge. They recently launched a business supporter program, which offers an opportunity for companies to also contribute by building on existing initiatives and platforms and frameworks such as SBTN, and align with actions that companies will take to meet their targets in step 4. I'll just round it out just by highlighting that GSK, Reckitt, and Etika were the first companies to officially join. And then just yesterday at the session here at World Water Week, IKEA announced they will be joining the program. So that's just a very, very quick overview of freshwater science-based targets and kind of the link to the freshwater challenge. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alan. Now, I'll be honest, I've been a terrible timekeeper, but I think it was very much not in vain, because we've heard not only sort of the theoretical lens of the targets, of the nature of these global policy frameworks, but also how are we currently doing adaptation? How does it really break down to the community level? How do we link different scales, be it national to basin? And of course, also, how do we engage other sectors? How do we engage also the private sector? How do we engage the corporate world? So therefore, I apologize very much, but I think in the spirit of World Water World, it has still shown us very much where the water community stands, what the water community contributes, and also how we can look ahead. And with looking ahead and truly focusing on that, I would now like for a bit of an acknowledgement and closing statement also in taking us forward towards COP30 and invite Tito Livio Queres to the stage, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Ministry of Integration and Regional Development of Brazil, who will tell us a bit about the ministry's work, water's role in their NDCs and NAPs, and of course the action agenda towards COP30. Thank you, Tito.
Good afternoon. I am the Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Integration and Regional Development of Brazil, the institution that is responsible for national water security, civil protection and defense, and regional development policies. Brazil is the guardian of the largest basin on the planet, the Amazon Basin. That is also the largest volume surface fresh water in the world, where Belém, the host city of COP30, is located. In our ministry, we work to reduce regional inequalities, guarantee water security, revitalize river basins, expand sustainable irrigation, and protect communities from risk and disasters. This practical experience of Brazil territory gives us not only the credibility, but also a special responsibility to contribute to implementation of the Global Adaptation Agenda. We work toward fulfilling the guidelines of Brazil nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, which highlights water as one of the central objectives for climate change adaptation. It emphasizes promoting water security to ensure adequate quality and quantity for multiple uses, such as supply, production, energy, and ecosystem maintenance. Based on this directive, the country is updating its national adaptation strategy, structured into 16 sectorial plans. This process has been conducted in a participatory manner with a broad involvement of society and public consultation to incorporate diverse contributions. The document will be published before COP30. This is a relevant exercise because we are living in a time of extremes. In 2024, the state of Rio Grande do Sul, mentioned before, located in the south of the country, faced the worst floods in its history. More than millions of people were affected. Entire cities were submerged, and significant part of the infrastructure was compromised. To prevent future disasters, we are working on mapping flood-prone areas and identifying the needs for adaptation in the territory. In the same year of 2024, in the other side of the country, the north of Brazil, in Amazon region, known for its abundant rivers, several communities lacked access to water due to a severe drought that struck the region. Also, in the semi-arid regions of the Brazil Northeast, one of the most populous semi-arid regions of the world, inhabited by millions of people, communities suffer from recurrent droughts that limited both agricultural production and human supply. These realities clearly show that when we talk about adaptation, we talk about water. The UAE-Belém Framework for Global Climate Resilience, adopted in Dubai and moving into its implementation stage in Belém, defined targets to be achieved by 2030. Allow me to connect some of these targets to examples of Brazil. First, water security. The São Francisco River Integration Project is in the northeast of Brazil, is one of the largest water transfer projects in Latin America, bringing water to over 12 million people in historically dry areas. The freshwater program installs solar-powered desalination system in rural communities in semi-arid region. The water truck operation, which provides emergency water supply to thousands of families during critical droughts periods, illustrates how short-term actions are also essential to guarantee dignity. 2. Food and agriculture. Brazil has millions of hectares of irrigated land, and in the semi-arid region, irrigation policies increase the productivity of family farming and strengthen regional productivity chains, reducing communities' vulnerability to climate variability. Third, health. Investments in basin revitalization, such as those of the São Francisco River and the Parnaíba River in the northeast of Brazil, reduce the incidence of water-related diseases and expand access to basic sanitation, which are pillars of public health. 4. Ecosystems. Brazil is the global reference in natural-based solutions. The recovery of degraded areas in basins projects, not only rivers, but also biodiversity, are essential to ecosystem services. The effort also contributes to the Brazilian NDC goal of restoring 12 million hectares of forests and other forms of native vegetation by 2030. Resilience of territory is the 5. Our national civil protection and defense system integrate federal, state, and municipal governments and use monitoring mechanisms and early warning technology to reduce impacts of disasters such as floods and landslides. And the last one, poverty and livelihoods. Regional development policies in Brazil often linked to water access, strengthen local productivity chains, create jobs, and promote social inclusion, connecting climate adaptation to the agenda of poverty reduction. Distinguished colleagues, COP30 in Belém aims to be the COP of implementation, and water can be the accelerator of this implementation phase because, as you all know, it is at the center of all objectives: health, agriculture, energy, cities, biodiversity, livelihoods, and social justice. But we recognize that we still have challenges. To move forward, we need everyone's engagement: national governments, local governments, the private sector, international financial institutions, civil society organizations, and local communities. It is essential to expand access to climate finance, especially concessional finance, and accelerate the transfer of technologies that allow for solutions adapted to local realities. Dear friends, in Belém, we have the responsibility to demonstrate that implementation is possible. Water can be the engine of this implementation. a common theme that unites science, public policies, finance, innovation, and traditional knowledge in a joint response. In this sense, the COP30 presidency is working to ensure that action agenda, along with all other COP dialogue mechanisms, contributes to addressing the three major challenges. First, align the action agenda with what has already been collectively agreed upon in successive UNFCCC COPs, leveraging existing initiatives to accelerate and expand climate implementation, and three, boosting transparency, monitoring, and fulfillment of both new and existing commitments and initiatives. The COP30 action agenda will serve as a dynamic repository of concrete initiatives, including those I highlighted from Brazil and others being implemented worldwide, effectively bringing climate ambition with practical on-the-ground implementation. Therefore, the COP30 action agenda aims to harness global initiatives and solutions that deliver tangible results, tracking their effectiveness over time through clear and well-defined indicators that signal when adjustments to plans are needed, with a vision of continuity going beyond COP30. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tito, and thank you all for participating. I hope you could learn a bit about the water sector's role in adaptation, how we look forward, where we come from, and importantly, what is needed for COP30 and beyond. Thank you. Yes, get a quick photo for all the speakers. That would be great on stage.